The guards whispered about him in the corridors. They said the prisoner in the East Tower had not touched food for 9 days. They said he sat in silence, staring at the stone wall, his body growing thinner with each sunrise. They said he would die soon, and no one could stop it. No one except her. Celestine stood outside the iron door, holding a wooden tray. Steam rose from the bowl of broth. Her hands trembled, but not from the cold. She had been summoned here by the king himself, given a task that made no sense. "Make him eat," the king had said, "or we lose our only hope." She did not know what that meant. She did not know who the prisoner was or why his life mattered so much. All she knew was that the guards had failed. The physicians had failed. And now they were sending her, a servant girl from the kitchens, to succeed where everyone else had not. The guard unlocked the door. It creaked open, revealing darkness. 10 minutes, the guard said. No more. Celestine stepped inside. The cell was cold and smelled of damp stone. A single window let in thin gray light. In the corner, a man sat on the floor, his back against the wall. His clothes were torn and dirty. His dark hair fell across his face. His wrists were chained to the wall, but the chains were long enough to let him move. He did not look at her. Celestine set the tray down on the floor, a few feet away from him. She knelt beside it, unsure of what to do next. "I brought you food," she said softly. He did not respond. She looked at him more closely. Even in the dim light, she could see the sharpness of his cheekbones, the hollowness beneath his eyes. His skin was pale, almost gray. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if breathing took effort. He was dying. "Please," she said, "you need to eat." Still, he did not move. Celestine felt frustration rise in her chest. She had been warned that he was stubborn, that he refused to speak or acknowledge anyone. But she had not expected this complete silence, this utter stillness. She reached for the bowl and lifted it carefully. The broth was still warm. She held it out toward him. "Just a little," she urged. "It will help." His eyes remained fixed on the wall. Celestine bit her lip. She did not know why this man had chosen to starve himself. She did not know what pain or anger drove him to such an extreme, but she could not let him die. Not when the king himself had asked her to save him. She moved closer, inching toward him on her knees. The chains around his wrists rattled slightly, but he did not react. "My name is Celestine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I work in the kitchens. I made this broth myself. It's not much, but it's warm, and it's good." Nothing. She felt a strange ache in her chest. She had seen hunger before. She had grown up poor, knowing what it felt like to go days without a proper meal. But this was different. This man was choosing to suffer. He was choosing to fade away, and she could not understand why. "Why won't you eat?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why are you doing this?" For the first time he moved. It was barely noticeable, just a slight tightening of his jaw. But it was enough to tell her that he had heard her. Celestine leaned forward, hope flickering in her heart. "Please," she whispered, "just tell me why." His eyes shifted. Slowly his gaze left the wall and turned toward her. Celestine's breath caught. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, dark gray with flecks of silver. They were filled with something she could not name. Not anger, not hatred. Something deeper. Something that looked like resignation. "Leave," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Celestine shook her head. "I can't." "Then stay," he said flatly, "but I will not eat." "Why not?" He looked away again. Because I choose not to. Celestine felt her frustration return, stronger this time. That's not a reason. That's just stubbornness. Call it what you want. You're going to die. I know. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Celestine stared at him, her mind racing. She did not know what to say. She did not know how to reach him. But she could not give up. Not yet. She looked down at the bowl in her hands, then back at him. An idea formed in her mind. It was bold, perhaps too bold, but she had nothing else. She dipped her fingers into the broth and lifted them to her lips, tasting it. It was warm and savory, made with herbs and vegetables she had carefully chosen that morning. Then she dipped her fingers again and held them out toward him. If you won't feed yourself, she said quietly, then I will feed you. His eyes snapped back to her, wide with surprise. Celestine did not waver. She kept her hand extended, broth dripping from her fingertips. Open your mouth. He stared at her as if she had lost her mind. No. Yes. I said no. And I said I'm not leaving until you eat. They locked eyes, and something shifted in the air. It was not quite a challenge, but it was close. A battle of wills between a dying prisoner and a stubborn kitchen girl. Celestine moved closer, so close that she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. She could smell the salt and sweat on his skin, the faint metallic scent of the chains. Please, she said again, softer this time. Just one taste. He shook his head, but there was something different in his expression now, something that looked almost like confusion. Why do you care? He asked. Celestine paused. It was a good question. She did not know this man. She had no reason to care whether he lived or died, and yet, looking at him now, seeing the pain in his eyes, she found that she did care, more than she should. Because you're suffering, she said simply, and I don't want you to. He laughed, but it was a bitter sound, empty of humor. You don't even know who I am. Does it matter? It should. Well, it doesn't. She moved her hand closer to his mouth. Now stop being difficult and eat. He looked at her hand, then at her face. For a long moment he did not move. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he leaned forward. His lips parted. Celestine's heart pounded as she touched her fingers to his mouth. He took the broth from her fingertips, his lips warm and soft against her skin. He swallowed, then closed his eyes. She waited, barely breathing. When he opened his eyes again, there was something new in them. Not gratitude, not relief, something more complicated. There, she said, her voice unsteady. That wasn't so hard, was it? He did not answer, but he did not refuse when she dipped her fingers into the broth again. Celestine fed him slowly, one taste at a time. She did not speak, and neither did he. The only sound was the faint clinking of the chains and the soft rustle of her dress against the stone floor. She noticed everything. The way his throat moved when he swallowed, the way his eyes followed her hand, the way his breathing slowed, became steadier. After several minutes, he turned his head away. Enough, he said. Celestine frowned. You've barely had anything. It's enough for now. She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. He was not refusing out of stubbornness anymore. He simply could not take more. She set the bowl down and wiped her hands on her apron. I'll come back tomorrow, she said, with more. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Don't. I will. Why? Because you need to eat, and apparently I'm the only one who can make you. He almost smiled. It was just a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, but it was there. Celestine stood and picked up the tray. She walked to the door and knocked twice. The guard opened it, and she stepped out into the corridor. As the door closed behind her, she heard his voice, quiet and rough. "Thank you." She stopped, her heart skipping. But the door was already locked, and she did not know if he expected a reply. So she simply walked away, the empty bowl in her hands and a strange warmth in her chest. That night, Celestine could not sleep. She lay in her small bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling. Her mind kept returning to the prisoner in the tower, to his hollow eyes and rough voice, to the way his lips had felt against her fingertips. She had fed many people in her life, nobles at banquets, servants in the kitchens, children in the village. But this had felt different, intimate, as if she had crossed some invisible line. She wondered who he was, why he was imprisoned, why he had chosen to starve, and why the king cared so much about keeping him alive. The next morning, she prepared another bowl of broth. This time, she added a bit of bread, softened in warm milk. She carried it to the tower, her heart beating faster with each step. The guard let her in without a word. The prisoner was in the same position as before, sitting against the wall, his eyes fixed on nothing. But when she entered, he looked up. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." She knelt beside him and set the tray down. He watched her, his expression cautious. "Why?" he asked again. Celestine met his gaze. "Because I made a promise." "To whom? The king?" She hesitated. "To myself." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You're strange." "So I've been told." She dipped her fingers into the broth and held them out. This time, he did not argue. He leaned forward and took the broth from her hand, his lips brushing her skin. Celestine felt a shiver run through her, but she ignored it. She focused on the task, feeding him slowly, carefully, making sure he did not take too much too fast. After a while, he spoke. "What's your name again?" "Celestine." "Celestine," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "It suits you." She looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "It means heavenly, and you appeared like an angel in this hell." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm no angel." "Perhaps not, but you're kind. That's rare." She did not know what to say to that, so she simply continued feeding him. When the bowl was half empty, he stopped her. "Enough." She nodded and set it aside. "Tomorrow, you'll have more." "You're persistent." "You're stubborn." He almost smiled again. "What's your story, Celestine?" She blinked. "My story? Everyone has one. Why are you working in the kitchens of a royal castle?" Celestine looked down at her hands. "I grew up in a village near here. My parents died when I was young. I came to the castle looking for work. The head cook took me in." "And you've been here ever since?" "For 5 years now." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you like it here?" She shrugged. "It's better than starving." "Is that all life is? Just surviving?" The question caught her off guard. She looked at him, seeing the sadness in his eyes, and realized that he was not just asking about her. He was asking about himself. "No," she said softly. "I think there's more. There has to be." He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "I used to think so too." Celestine wanted to ask him more, wanted to know what had happened to him, what had stolen the hope from his eyes. But the guard knocked on the door, signaling that her time was up. She stood reluctantly. "I'll see you tomorrow." He nodded but said nothing. As she left, she felt his eyes on her back, heavy and thoughtful. The days passed, one after another, and Celestine returned to the tower each morning. She brought broth, bread, sometimes fruit. She fed him with her own hands, and slowly he began to eat more, His body grew stronger. The color returned to his cheeks. His eyes became clearer. But he remained a mystery. He never told her his name. He never explained why he had refused to eat or why he was imprisoned. He only spoke in brief sentences, answering her questions with as few words as possible. Yet there was something growing between them, something neither of them acknowledged, but both of them felt. It was in the way he watched her when she entered the room, in the way his breath hitched when her fingers touched his lips, in the way he leaned closer, as if drawn to her warmth. And Celestine felt it too. A strange pull in her chest whenever she was near him, a longing she did not understand. On the 7th day, something changed. She arrived at the tower as usual, carrying the tray, but when the guard opened the door, she heard voices inside. She paused, listening. "You have to eat on your own now," a man's voice said. It was stern, authoritative. "The girl cannot keep coming here." "I don't care," the prisoner replied. His voice was stronger now, no longer weak and raspy. "I'll eat when she feeds me, not before." "This is absurd." "Then let me starve." Celestine's heart pounded. She stepped inside, and both men turned to look at her. The other man was tall and well-dressed, with greying hair and sharp eyes. He looked at her with disapproval. "You're the kitchen girl?" he asked. Celestine nodded. "Yes, my lord." "This arrangement cannot continue. It's unseemly." "Unseemly?" the prisoner said, his voice cold. "She's the only reason I'm alive. If you take her away, I'll stop eating again." The man's jaw tightened. "You're being childish." "Perhaps, but it's my choice." The man glared at him, then at Celestine. "Fine, but this will end soon, one way or another." He turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Celestine stared after him, confused. "Who was that?" The prisoner sighed. "The king's advisor. He thinks he can control everything." "Can he?" "No." His eyes met hers. "Not this." Celestine knelt beside him, setting the tray down. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Why did you say that? About not eating if I stopped coming?" He looked away. "Because it's true." "But why? You're stronger now. You can feed yourself." "I know." "Then why?" He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost vulnerable. "Because when you're here, I remember what it feels like to be human." Celestine's breath caught. She stared at him, her heart aching. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "Why are you here?" He closed his eyes. "I can't tell you." "Why not?" "Because if I do, you'll leave, and I can't bear that." She reached out, hesitating, then gently touched his hand. His skin was rough and scarred, but warm. "I won't leave," she said. "I promise." He opened his eyes and looked at her hand on his. Slowly, carefully, he turned his palm up and laced his fingers through hers. "You don't know what you're promising," he said. "Then tell me." He shook his head. "Not yet." Celestine squeezed his hand. "When?" "When I'm ready." She wanted to argue, but she saw the pain in his eyes and knew she could not push him. Not now. So she simply picked up the bowl and fed him, their fingers still intertwined. On the 8th day, Celestine arrived to find the prisoner standing. He was at the window, looking out at the grey sky. His chains clinked softly as he moved. He turned when he heard her enter, and she saw that he looked different, stronger, almost whole. "You're standing," she said, surprised. "Thanks to you." She set the tray down, feeling a strange mix of pride and sadness. If he was recovering, that meant her task was nearly complete. Soon, he would not need her anymore. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Better. Stronger." He walked toward her, the chains dragging behind him. But still trapped. Celestine looked at the iron cuffs around his wrists. They had rubbed his skin raw in places, leaving red marks. "Do they hurt?" "I've grown used to them." She frowned. "That doesn't mean they don't hurt." He smiled faintly. "You're right." He sat down across from her, closer than he had been before, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. She picked up the bowl, but before she could dip her fingers in, he stopped her. "Wait," he said. She looked at him, confused. He reached out and took the bowl from her hands. Then, slowly, he lifted it to his lips and drank. Celestine's heart sank. "You're feeding yourself." "Yes." "Then you don't need me anymore." He set the bowl down and looked at her, his gray eyes intense. "I didn't say that." "But I don't need you to feed me," he said quietly. "But I need you here. I need to see you, to hear your voice, to know that someone in this world still cares whether I live or die." Celestine felt tears prick her eyes. She did not know why his words affected her so deeply, but they did. "I care," she whispered. "I know." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers gentle. "That's why I started eating again." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Please, tell me." He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "My name is Ronan," he said, "and I am the rightful heir to this kingdom." Celestine's eyes snapped open. She stared at him, shock flooding through her. "What?" He pulled his hand back, his expression pained. "I knew you'd react like this." "You're the prince?" "I was, before my brother took the throne." Celestine's mind raced. She had heard rumors years ago about a prince who had disappeared. Some said he had died, others said he had been exiled, but no one knew the truth. "Your brother imprisoned you?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ronan nodded. "He accused me of treason, said I was planning to overthrow him. It wasn't true, but no one believed me." He looked down at his chains. "He locked me here and told everyone I was dead." "But the king, he wants you alive. He sent me to you." Ronan laughed bitterly. "My brother needs me alive. I'm the only one who knows where our father hid the royal seal. Without it, his claim to the throne is weak. He's been trying to get me to talk for months." "And you refused?" "I'd rather die than help him." Celestine felt a surge of anger. "So you decided to starve yourself? That's your plan?" "It was the only power I had left." "That's not power. That's giving up." He looked at her, surprised by the force of her words. "What would you have me do? Fight back? I'm chained to a wall." "You could live," she said fiercely. "You could survive. You could wait for a chance to escape or to prove your innocence." "There is no chance." "There's always a chance." She grabbed his hand, holding it tightly. "You said I made you feel human again." "Well, you make me feel brave. And I think, together, we could find a way out of this." Ronan stared at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Celestine did not have a good answer. She barely knew him. She had no reason to trust him or to believe his story. But she did. She believed him with a certainty that defied logic. "Because I see you," she said softly. "Not the prince, not the prisoner, just you. And you deserve to live." Ronan's expression crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, and she felt his body shake with silent sobs. Celestine wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming down her own face. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if they could escape or if they would even survive. But in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. She loved him. The next day was the 9th day. Celestine arrived at the tower with a plan. It was risky and probably foolish, but it was the only one she had. She had spent the night talking to the other servants, asking careful questions, gathering information. She had learned that the king's advisor, the man who had visited Ronan, was planning to move him to another location, somewhere more secure, somewhere Celestine could not reach. She had to act, now. When she entered the cell, Ronan was waiting for her. He stood as soon as he saw her, his eyes searching her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. "They're moving you," she said quickly. "Tomorrow, I don't know where." His face darkened. "Then this is it." "No." She pulled a small knife from the folds of her dress. It was nothing more than a kitchen blade, dull and short, but it was all she had. "We're getting you out of here." Ronan's eyes widened. "Celestine, no, if they catch you—" "They won't." "You don't know that." "I don't care." She moved to his wrists, examining the chains. They were old, rusted in places. The locks were simple. If she could just— "Stop," Ronan said, his voice urgent. "This is too dangerous." "Do you want to stay here?" she demanded. "Do you want to let your brother win?" "I want you to be safe." "I am safe, as long as you're alive." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "Now hold still." She worked quickly, using the knife to pry at the lock on his right wrist. It was harder than she had expected. The metal was thick, the mechanism stubborn. But she kept going, her fingers aching, her heart pounding. Minutes passed. Then, with a sharp click, the lock gave way. Ronan stared at his free hand, disbelief on his face. "You did it." "One down," Celestine said, moving to the other wrist. This lock was tighter, more secure. She struggled with it, her hands slipping on the knife's handle. Sweat dripped down her forehead. "Hurry," Ronan whispered, glancing at the door. "I'm trying." The knife slipped, cutting her palm. She gasped, pain shooting through her hand. "Celestine." "I'm fine." She gritted her teeth and kept working, ignoring the blood dripping from her hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the second lock clicked open. Ronan was free. He rubbed his wrists, staring at them as if he could not believe it. Then he looked at Celestine, at the blood on her hand, and his expression turned anguished. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." He grabbed her hand, cradling it gently. "It's not nothing." "We don't have time for this." She pulled her hand back and tore a strip of fabric from her apron, wrapping it around the cut. "We need to go. Now." Ronan hesitated, then nodded. "Where?" "There's a servant's passage. It leads out of the castle. I use it sometimes to go to the market." "Will it be guarded?" "Not at this hour. Most of the guards are at the main gate." He took her uninjured hand, squeezing it. "If we get caught—" "We won't. But if we do, then we face it together." He looked at her, his eyes filled with something deep and powerful. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate, filled with all the fear and hope and longing they had not been able to speak. Celestine kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that moment. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "Let's go," Ronan said. They moved to the door. Celestine knocked twice, the signal for the guard. When he opened it, she smiled sweetly. "All done for today?" she said. The guard nodded, barely glancing at them. He did not notice that Ronan's chains were gone, hidden beneath the folds of his torn cloak. They walked past him, down the corridor, moving quickly but not running. Celestine's heart hammered in her chest. Any moment someone could notice, any moment the alarm could sound. But it didn't. They reached the servants' passage, a narrow staircase hidden behind a tapestry. Celestine pulled the tapestry aside and led Ronan down the stairs. The passage was dark and cramped, lit only by a few small candles. Their footsteps echoed off the stone walls. Celestine moved quickly, knowing the way by heart. Behind them, a shout rang out. "The prisoner is gone!" Celestine's blood ran cold. "Run!" They sprinted down the passage, their feet pounding on the stone. The shouts grew louder, closer. Torchlight flickered behind them. "This way!" Celestine pulled Ronan to the left, down a side corridor. It was narrower, barely wide enough for one person. They squeezed through, Ronan's shoulders scraping the walls. They emerged into a storage room filled with barrels and crates. Celestine ran to the far side, where a small door led outside. She pushed it open, and cold air rushed in. They stumbled out into the night, into a narrow alley behind the castle. The moon was high, casting silver light over the cobblestones. "Which way?" Ronan asked, his voice urgent. Celestine pointed to the east. "The forest. We can hide there." They ran, hand in hand, through the winding streets of the city. Behind them, the alarm bells began to ring, loud and insistent. But they did not stop. They ran until they reached the edge of the forest, where the trees stood tall and dark. They plunged into the shadows, branches whipping at their faces, roots catching at their feet. Finally, when they could run no more, they collapsed against a large oak tree, gasping for breath. Celestine looked back toward the castle. She could see the lights, the movement of guards searching, but they were far now, too far to be easily found. "We did it," she whispered. Ronan laughed, a sound of disbelief and relief. "We did." He turned to her, pulling her into his arms. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving me." Celestine hugged him tightly, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "You saved me too," she said. He pulled back, looking confused. "How?" "You gave me a reason to be brave." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "You were always brave, Celestine. You just needed a reason to see it." He kissed her again, softer this time, and she melted into him. But their moment was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. They froze, looking through the trees. Torchlight flickered in the distance. The guards were coming. "We have to keep moving," Ronan said. Celestine nodded, her fear returning. "Where will we go?" "I have allies, people who believed in my father's vision, who never trusted my brother. If we can reach them, they'll help us." "Where are they?" 3 days' journey from here, in the northern mountains. 3 days. It seemed impossible, but they had no other choice. They started walking, moving deeper into the forest, away from the lights and the sounds of pursuit. The night was long and cold. They walked until their legs ached and their feet bled, but they did not stop. As dawn broke, they found a small cave hidden among the rocks. They crawled inside, exhausted, and huddled together for warmth. Celestine rested her head on Ronan's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted, "but I'm also hopeful, for the first time in years." "Because we escaped?" "Because I'm with you." She tilted her head up to look at him. His face was shadowed, but she could see the softness in his eyes. "What happens if we don't make it?" she asked quietly. "We will. But if we don't?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then at least I'll have known what it feels like to be loved." Celestine's heart swelled. "You think I love you?" "I hope you do. Because I love you, Celestine. I think I have since the moment you refused to leave that cell." She smiled, tears filling her eyes. "I love you too." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. And in that small, dark cave, with danger all around them, they found a moment of peace. The next 3 days were the hardest of Celestine's life. They traveled through forests and over hills, avoiding roads and towns. They ate wild berries and drank from streams. At night, they slept in hidden places, always listening for the sound of pursuit. Ronan told her stories about his childhood, about growing up as a prince. He spoke of his father, a kind and just king, and his mother, who had died when he was young. He spoke of his brother, who had always been jealous, always hungry for power. "I should have seen it coming," Ronan said one night, as they sat by a small fire. "But I trusted him. I thought family meant something." Celestine took his hand. "It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? I was naive. I believed that goodness would always win." "Maybe it will. Maybe we just have to fight for it." He looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You're wiser than you know." "I'm just a kitchen girl." "No, you're more than that. You're strong and brave and kind. You're everything I wish I could be." "You already are those things." He shook his head. "I gave up, Celestine. I was ready to die." "But you didn't. You're here. You're alive." "Because of you." She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of the fire on her face. "We're going to make it," she said. "I believe that." "I hope you're right." On the third day, they reached the mountains. The path was steep and treacherous, winding through narrow passes and over rocky ledges. Celestine's legs burned with exhaustion, but she pushed forward. As the sun began to set, they saw it, a small fortress built into the side of the mountain. Smoke rose from its chimneys, and lights glowed in the windows. "That's it," Ronan said, relief flooding his voice. "We made it." They approached the gates, and a guard stepped out, his hand on his sword. "Who goes there?" he called. Ronan stepped forward, pulling back the hood of his cloak. "Tell your lord that Ronan of House Alaric has come seeking refuge." The guard's eyes widened. He stared at Ronan, then quickly bowed. "My prince, we thought you were dead." "Not yet." The guard hurried inside, and moments later the gates opened. A man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, with gray hair and a weathered face. He looked at Ronan, disbelief and joy warring on his features. "Ronan," he breathed. "It really is you." Ronan smiled. "Hello, Theron." The man pulled him into a fierce embrace. "We've been searching for you. We heard rumors, but we couldn't confirm anything." "My brother made sure of that." Theron pulled back, his expression darkening. "That traitor. He's turned the kingdom into a prison. The people are suffering under his rule." "I know, and I intend to stop him." Theron looked at Celestine, curiosity in his eyes. "And who is this?" "This is Celestine," Ronan said, his voice warm. "She saved my life." Theron bowed to her. "Then you are welcome here, my lady." Celestine flushed. "I'm not a lady, just a servant." "You're more than that," Ronan said firmly. "Much more." Theron led them inside, to a warm hall with a roaring fire and tables laden with food. Other men and women gathered around, people who had once served Ronan's father, who still believed in the old ways. They told Ronan everything that had happened in his absence, how his brother had raised taxes and silenced dissenters, how the people whispered of rebellion but were too afraid to act. "They need a leader," Theron said. "They need you." Ronan looked around the room, at the faces watching him with hope and expectation. Then he looked at Celestine, who smiled at him. "I'll do it," Ronan said. "But I'll need your help." "You have it," Theron said. "All of us. We'll fight for you." Plans were made, messages were sent, and slowly, over the following weeks, an army began to gather. Celestine stayed by Ronan's side through it all. She was not a warrior or a strategist, but she was his anchor. She reminded him why he was fighting. She gave him strength when he faltered and hope when he despaired. And as the days passed, their love grew deeper. One night, as they stood on the balcony of the fortress, looking out at the stars, Ronan turned to her. "When this is over," he said, "I want to marry you." Celestine's breath caught. "Marry me?" "Yes. if you'll have me." She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "You're a prince. I'm a kitchen girl. How could that ever work?" "I don't care about titles or status. I care about you." He took her hands in his. "You're the reason I'm alive, Celestine. You're the reason I believe in anything anymore. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Celestine looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, and felt her heart overflow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her, and the stars seemed to shine brighter. The battle for the kingdom came on a cold winter morning. Ronan's army, small but fierce, marched on the capital. The people, hearing that the true prince had returned, rose up to join him. Farmers and merchants, blacksmiths and bakers, all took up arms to fight against the tyrant king. The battle was brutal. Blood was spilled, and lives were lost. But Ronan fought with a determination that inspired everyone around him. Celestine did not fight, but she stayed close, tending to the wounded, offering water and comfort. She saw the horror of war, the pain and the loss, and her heart ached. But she did not regret it, not when she saw Ronan fighting for his people, for justice, for a better future. In the end, Ronan's brother fell. He was captured, tried, and exiled. The kingdom was restored to its rightful ruler. And Ronan, once a prisoner left to die, became a king. The coronation was a grand affair. The entire city gathered to witness it. Ronan stood before the crowd, wearing the crown that had once belonged to his father, and he spoke of hope and unity and change. Then he turned to Celestine, who stood beside him, and took her hand. "This woman saved my life," he said, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "She saw me at my lowest, and she refused to let me give up. She is the reason I stand before you today. And I want all of you to know that she is not just my love. She is my equal, my partner, my queen." The crowd erupted in cheers. Celestine stared at Ronan, tears streaming down her face. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "You're everything," he said, "and I want the world to know it." He placed a second crown on her head, smaller and simpler than his, but beautiful. The crowd cheered louder, and Celestine, the kitchen girl who had once fed a dying prisoner with her own hands, became a queen. Years passed. Ronan proved to be a wise and just ruler. He lowered taxes, listened to his people, and worked tirelessly to rebuild the kingdom. And Celestine was by his side through it all. Not as a silent figurehead, but as an active partner. She established programs to help the poor, opened schools for children, and created a network of kitchens to feed the hungry. She never forgot where she came from, and she used her position to make life better for those who had once been like her. Together, they transformed the kingdom into a place of prosperity and hope, and their love never wavered. On quiet nights, when the work was done and the court was empty, they would sit together in their chambers, holding hands and talking about the future. "Do you ever regret it?" Ronan asked one night. "Giving up your quiet life for all this?" Celestine smiled. "Not for a moment. Even with all the responsibility, all the danger. Even with all of that," she leaned against him, "because I have you, and that makes everything worth it." He kissed the top of her head. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. You're a good man, Ronan, a good king, and a good husband. Only because you make me want to be better." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Celestine asked. "How could I forget? You walked into that cell like you owned the place." She laughed. "I was terrified. You didn't show it. I didn't want you to see." He turned to look at her, his eyes warm. "You were so determined, so stubborn. I thought you were insane." "Maybe I was." "No, you were brave. You saw someone suffering and you decided to help, even though you had no reason to. That's not insanity. That's love." Celestine felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't know it was love then. I just knew I couldn't let you die. And I couldn't let you leave. Even when I was at my weakest, even when I wanted to give up, you gave me a reason to keep going. We saved each other, Celestine said softly. Yes, we did. He kissed her, slow and tender, and she felt the same warmth she had felt that first time in the cell. The same connection, the same certainty. They were meant to be together. One day, years later, Celestine stood in the kitchen of the castle. It was the same kitchen where she had once worked as a servant, and it felt strange to be back. But she was not there to work. She was there to visit. The new head cook, a young woman named Isla, smiled at her. "Your Majesty, what brings you here?" Celestine smiled. "I wanted to see how you were doing, and I wanted to help if you'll let me." Isla's eyes widened. "You want to help? In the kitchen?" "Why not? I used to love cooking." Isla hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. We'd be honored." Celestine rolled up her sleeves and joined the other cooks, chopping vegetables and stirring pots. It felt good to work with her hands again, to do something simple and satisfying. As she worked, she thought about how much her life had changed. She had gone from a poor orphan to a queen. She had saved a prince and become his partner. She had helped rebuild a kingdom. But in some ways, she was still the same girl who had walked into that cell with a bowl of broth. She was still someone who believed in kindness, who believed that one person could make a difference. That evening, she brought a bowl of soup to Ronan in their chambers. He looked at it, then at her, and laughed. "What's this?" "I made it for you, in the kitchen." He took the bowl, his eyes twinkling. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." He took a sip, then closed his eyes. "It's delicious, just like the first time." Celestine sat beside him. "Do you remember, when I fed you with my own hands?" "I remember everything," he said quietly. "Every moment, every word, every touch." "I was so scared you would die." "I was scared too, but not of dying. I was scared of never knowing what it felt like to be loved." "And now?" He set the bowl aside and pulled her into his arms. "Now I know. And it's the greatest gift I've ever received." Celestine rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was strong and steady, a reminder of how far they had come. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied. "More than words can say." They sat together, holding each other, as the sun set outside their window. And in that moment, they were not a king and queen. They were just two people who had saved each other. Two people who had refused to give up. Two people who had found love in the darkest of places. Years turned into decades. Ronan and Celestine grew old together, their hair turning grey, their faces lined with age. But their love never faded. They had children who grew up to be strong and kind, taught by their parents' example. And when the time came, their eldest son took the throne, continuing the legacy they had built. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the kingdom held a grand celebration. People came from all over to honor the king and queen who had changed their lives. But Ronan and Celestine slipped away from the festivities, seeking a quiet moment alone. They walked to the tower where Ronan had once been imprisoned. It had been converted into a library, a place of learning and hope. But the cell remained, preserved as a reminder of the past. They stood in the doorway, looking at the empty space. "Hard to believe it's been so long," Ronan said. Celestine nodded. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come to me?" "Every day." "And?" "And I'm grateful I did. Because you gave me a life I never could have imagined." He took her hand, wrinkled and spotted with age, but still strong. "You gave me a life worth living." They stood there for a long moment, remembering. Then they turned and walked out, hand in hand, into the light. When Celestine finally passed, many years later, the kingdom mourned. Ronan held her hand as she took her last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude. And when she was gone, he felt a piece of his soul go with her. But he did not despair, because he knew that she had given him the greatest gift anyone could give. She had given him hope. She had given him love. She had given him a reason to live, and he carried that with him until his own final days, when he joined her in whatever lay beyond. The story of Ronan and Celestine became legend. Bards sang songs about the kitchen girl who saved a prince. Poets wrote verses about their love. Children heard tales of their bravery and were inspired to be kind. And in the castle, in the library that had once been a prison, a plaque was placed on the wall. It read, "In this place, a man refused to eat for 9 days, choosing death over surrender. But one woman saw his pain and refused to let him go. She fed him with her own hands, and in doing so, she saved not just his life, but his soul." This is a reminder that love can conquer even the darkest despair, that kindness can change the world, and that sometimes the smallest act can have the greatest impact. In memory of King Ronan and Queen Celestine, who taught us that true strength lies not in power, but in compassion. And so their story lived on, a beacon of hope for all who heard it, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love can light the way.